How often do you find yourself thinking or saying, if only Hashem would do some extraordinary miracle, clearly show to me, demonstrate to me his hashgacha pratis, his divine intervention, his involvement in my life. If only he would do that, would I have unwavering bitachon, trust in Hashem. I believe we often think that. But as we read this week's parsha, I think we might see that this is a misnomer. It's not true. It says in the parsha, Moshe is telling over to the Klal Yisrael, to the Jews, that Hashem gave us the manna in the midbar, in the desert, in order to give us hardship and to test us. To test us? What test is there when all of your livelihood, all you need to do is roll out of bed, go to your front door, maybe walk a few feet to collect your food? It's the test. And the hardship also, what's the hardship here? So I think first, to understand the test, you need to see what the Talmud, the Gemara, and Yuma says about the hardship. And it explains that the hardship was that Hashem only provided enough food for each day. And there's a famous axiom, you can't compare the state of mind of one who has bread in the basket to one who doesn't have bread in the basket. You can't compare the state of mind of somebody who has food for the future to someone who doesn't have food for the future. In other words, someone who has a secure job, gets paid every 2 weeks, is going to be in a different state of mind, be more relaxed about his future than somebody who's living day to day on a stipend, maybe on unemployment from the government, doesn't know where his check is coming from tomorrow. And that's what the hardship was here that Hashem was giving to the Jews by giving them only enough man for each day, so they had to worry about where their food was going to come from tomorrow. And using this explanation of the hardship, Rashi says that the test that the Jews faced, the reason why this was a test was Hashem only provided, or Hashem had told them that they also can only take enough food for that day, what they needed, except for on Friday where they were allowed to take 2 portions for Shabbos. And the test was, would they adhere to those guidelines? Or would they succumb to the fear and the concern of where am I going to get my food tomorrow and start storing up and hoarding more than the allotment that they were allowed to take? And that was the test according to Rashi. But it's still difficult to understand this, because this is not comparable to a typical situation of somebody who doesn't have bread for the future, doesn't know where his paycheck tomorrow is coming from. Here we're talking about Klal Yisrael, Jews who are getting the man every day from Hashem. Isn't this the utopia, that ideal that we were talking about in the beginning, that we wish Hashem would show us his hashgacha pratis involvement in clear ways that are undeniable? Isn't that what they had in the midbar for 40 years? Yet still it was a test. How was it a test? How was it possible that they would have questions or doubts about where their future food and sustenance was going to come from? And I think to understand this, you have to get deep insight into human psychology and the way that we're wired. Hashem created a world with teva, with seeming nature, in order to hide his involvement. So we go out into the world and we, the normal way to get a paycheck is you get a job and you get a paycheck. The way to have food, you go out, somebody's a farmer, goes out to the field, plants whatever produce he's trying to grow, and does the whole process in order to grow. So there's the nature, there's a teva that Hashem created, but really, it's Hashem is behind everything. And he did that in order to hide his hand. In order to make it that we have to look a little bit deeper to see his involvement. But even once one has that realization, once recognizes that really the teva in this world is just a way of Hashem hiding his involvement, and he realizes that everything comes from Hashem. Even after all of that, we still need to see how Hashem is going to provide it for us. And that's the challenge that the Jews had, the test that the Jews had in the Midbar, in the desert. That even though it must have been so clear to them that everything that they had was from Hashem, because their meal that day was a miracle, it was the man. But there still was some lack of trust, of bitachon in Hashem that came from the fact that they couldn't see how Hashem was going to give it to them tomorrow. Because it had to happen through a miracle, because there was no natural way that they were going to get food the next day in the Midbar, in the desert. There was no food there, no source of food. So that provided a challenge for them that they could have had difficulty trusting in how Hashem is going to provide them food for tomorrow, that may have compelled them to take more food, more man than they were allowed to take to store for the future. And when I encountered this Rashi and this pasuk, a little switch in my approach to bitachon, to trusting in Hashem. I always focused on these grand, extraordinary stories of hashgacha pratis, of divine intervention. And yet, truth is, they are powerful and are necessary. But I think we see from here that the more substantial and long-lasting approach to bitachon, to working on trusting in Hashem, is not to focus on the extraordinary so much. Yes, they could be helpful, but not to focus on them. Rather, to focus more on finding Hashem, hashgacha pratis in our day-to-day, in everyday activities that we do. And see Him in the more mundane parts of our life. And through that, we will create a more substantial and more lasting bitachon in Hashem. Have a good Shabbos.